loser. Integrative negotiation, therefore, is known as what?
Win-win.
Very good. Win-win. Yeah, see how easy this is already? You already know it. We could probably leave now. So, we'll spend quite a bit of time on that. Make sure you know the difference between distributive and integrative, because there is an exam question on those topics. Okay? You have to know the difference between win-win and win-lose. Topic 7 is called perception, cognition, and emotion, all of which is used in negotiation. We'll talk about people's perceptions, the importance of people's perceptions during negotiation. One of the key elements of perception is different cultures. So when you get into different cultures, people have different perceptions depending upon their cultural and ethnic background. Okay? So we'll talk about that a little bit. Ethics. Everybody knows about ethics, right? Okay. We'll talk about ethics in negotiation. And you have to remember there's a basic fundamental element of ethics is that just because something is unethical, why do I feel coffee running down my hand? Just because something is unethical, it does not necessarily mean it is illegal. But if it is illegal, it is usually unethical. Try to figure that out. Say that. I want you to repeat that 5 times very quickly. Not really. Everybody got that? So, if it's unethical, not necessarily illegal, but if it's illegal, it's usually unethical. And you also have to remember when we're talking about ethics, ethical standard, what is ethical and unethical will differ from country to country, culture to culture. And that's a very important piece of this puzzle here, okay? So what's ethical here may not be ethical in the West. What's unethical in the West may not be ethical in Europe, and so on and so forth. So there is a very vast difference between ethics when you're applying it in a global standard. Okay? Everybody got that? 9, we're going to stretch to the international and cross-cultural negotiation field, simply because with globalization today, not all negotiations are done in one location or one country. A lot of people are negotiating. I mean, if you look at the business model, people that, let's say, do procurement, for example. When you're buying from suppliers, you're not necessarily buying anymore in your home country. You may be buying from different countries. Therefore, you may be negotiating with suppliers in different countries. So there is international and cross-cultural negotiation that goes on that we need to be aware of. Okay? Some of the processes. The last chapter is called impasse. What is an impasse? Anybody know? Anybody play chess?
Yeah.
Okay. What do we call an impasse in chess? Nobody knows? Then you don't play chess. You play it in Arabic? Oh, that makes a difference. No, an impasse is when there's no solution. You can't move forward or backwards. What?
Okay.
What is that
Checkmate,
mean?
checkmate, checkmate.
Well, it's not really checkmate. Checkmate is when somebody wins,
This is end,
somebody loses.
yeah.
Okay. Impasse is basically when there's no further movement. So if 2 people negotiating can't move forward, they're at an impasse. Okay? Got it?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe this means drawn. If it in chess it is
A
drawn.
draw?
Drawn.
Drawn?
Yes.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about it. I just want to know. I didn't want to confuse you with the word impasse. Yeah, kind of a dead end. The common term for impasse, you're very close, is deadlocked. Deadlock. I didn't want to use that because it's not a common word here. Deadlock means, it's like if 2 countries are negotiating a treaty and they're going nowhere, they're deadlocked, okay? That's the same thing. They're at impasse. They can't move forward. And sometimes you have to bring in like a mediator to get the 2 parties talking again, okay? So, that's what we're talking about. So, communication and strategy. Oh boy. My face was all swollen this morning when I woke up. I'm terribly allergic to dust storms. And naturally, they had a dust storm when I came here yesterday. I mean, if you'd seen my face this morning, I mean, it was blown up like a balloon. So it's still not too bad now, does it? I put cold water on it and put some medication. I have this problem in Abu Dhabi. I mean, sometimes it gets so big, I look like a monster. I walk into I had to teach a class one day, and my face was all puffed out, and everybody was going, "Oh, take the mask off." I said, "No, this is me." So my face looks like puffy like here, okay? It's just, I have a terrible allergic reaction to I probably shouldn't live in the Middle East anymore. But I've developed this terrible allergy to dust. Not dust like in the house, but sand dust. Because there's a lot of bacteria and stuff in that stuff. I'm very allergic to it. So when I was landing last night, I couldn't even, I said, "Where's the runway?" You know, we're like hovering, and I was like, "Where's the runway? How can a pilot even see?" It was so bad here last night. So, anyway, I just thought I'd mention that in case anybody's saying, "Why does that guy's face look funny?" It's not too bad now. So, communication defined. Now, I normally try to avoid slides like this with a lot of data. Most of my slides work on graphic images because they're much easier to understand. But sometimes I can't get away from data, so you have to be patient with me. There's just some things you have to kind of spell out. All right. So, communication defined. We have several definitions here. A gentleman by the name of Lussier, 1996, said the process of a sender transmitting a message to a receiver with mutual understanding. If people do not agree on the meaning of the message, then communication is not taking place. Brilliant. That guy must have stayed up months and months and months trying to come up with that definition. A sender to a receiver. So, two-way process of reaching mutual understanding in which participants not only exchange encode and decode information, news, ideas, and feelings, but also they create and share meaning. So in general, communication is a means of connecting people or places. The Business Dictionary says in business, it is a key function of management. An organization cannot operate without communication between levels, departments, and employees. So that's communication defined. Okay. Managing communication. So, employees want to be kept informed about a company's strategy, direction, and key initiatives. Would you agree with that or disagree with that? Do employees want to be informed? They want to know what's going on? Yeah! Yeah. What do we call that? Anybody know? It begins with a T. Transparency. Okay, you've heard of transparency, right? A lot of companies have transparency as a company value. And that's what it means. Being open and honest with our employees. Okay? Now, not everybody works for a company that's open and honest, but hopefully you do. Because employees want to know what's going on. Are we doing well? Are we doing poorly? Are we, if we're doing poorly, does that, don't expect a bonus at the end of the year and so on and so forth. Okay? So employees leaving an organization often cite the lack of communication and a feeling of being cut off from the company as primary reasons for their departure. So this is a big thing with people, okay? They want to have communication from management. A formal and comprehensive communication strategy will ensure consistent messages are delivered, messages support a recognizable employment brand, and messages express the organization's mission, vision, and culture of the organization. All that is done through communication. So, when we talk about managerial communication, we look at things like levels of responsibility and accountability. The higher the level of responsibility in the organization, the more accountability one inherits. And that's very true. One of my basic arguments when I worked in corporate America was the higher in the organization I went, the more responsibility and accountability I get. Now, I don't have a problem with that as long as I have a level of authority to go along with the level of accountability. That make sense? Because many times that's what companies do. They give you accountability and responsibility, but they don't give you the authority to make things happen. Make sense? Yeah, that's always been a real problem I've had with companies. Okay. Organizational culture okay, is successful communication occurs by adapting to existing culture rather than trying to change the culture. Personality differences. Employees have their own preferences for gathering, organizing, and disseminating information that need to be accommodated. Okay? And organizational dynamics means that as organizations change according to external needs, communication methods need to change as well. And organizations who go through change process, most of the change that happens in an organization, most of it, not all of it, but most of it is because of external factors. The economy, for example, okay? Environmental laws, other political and legal requirements sometimes drive change. So as companies change, they're saying that communication has to change as well, or their methods of communication. So, what are the levels of communication? You have interpersonal, organizational, and what we call mass or public. So, intrapersonal is communicating within ourselves, sending messages to various parts of our body. Do we do that? Yeah. If I pick up this bottle of water and it's ice cold, my brain, okay, is getting the message from where? My head. Yeah, exactly. Okay. That's intrapersonal communication. Very simple. Interpersonal is communicating externally between one or more parties, verbally or non-verbally. Do we communicate non-verbally? How?
Body language.
Yeah, body language. A big part of your culture here.
Yes,
If, you know, because in the Mideast, for example, Japan and so on, you have what's called a high context culture, which means a lot of communication transpires through body language. Okay? I mean, if you ever watch two people here from a distance, if you can't hear them, you can almost tell what they're saying simply by their facial expressions, their hand movements.
Fingers.
They're shouting at somebody. Okay? So, it's interpersonal. Organizational communication is communicating within an organization, sending or receiving messages through various layers of authority. And most communication in an organization is kind of a top-down flow. Okay? Mass or public is communicating to many people simultaneously, such as through the internet, publications, and so on. It's called mass or public communication. A newspaper is a means of mass or public communication. Okay. Everybody got that? Okay. This one you should know for your exam. Okay. Barriers. Because you have a communication question on your exam, and one of the parts of that question are what are some of the barriers? In other words, what prevents communication? It can be environmental, cultural, language, psychological, or relational. Now, you have this slide in your materials, but I think it will appear differently. I changed the graphic. But it's the same information, so don't get nervous. I like this slide better. It looks better on the screen. So, environmental, information overload, frequent interruptions and anxiety. What is information overload?
Like today, we have a lot of information.
Yeah, good, yeah. Nasty, but that's good. I like that. No, you're absolutely right. By the end of the day, you guys are going to have information overload. Like, no mas. What does no mas mean? No mas, Spanish. No more, please. No more, I can't take any more. A lot of times we work for organizations. Do we get information overload? Sometimes organizations roll out so many different new programs all at once. It's like every day you come in, you have something again and again and again, or meetings and meetings and meetings. That's information overload. Sometimes we call it TMI. Too much information. You know where there's too much information? Social media, Facebook. Too much information. Like, I really don't care what you had for lunch today, all right? Or what you're wearing today, or what time you went to the comfort room today. I really don't care. But some people have too much information. It's information overload on Facebook. That's why I hate Facebook. So, frequent interruptions can be a barrier. You're trying to have a conversation, and somebody keeps interrupting you, or your phone keeps ringing, or somebody's knocking on your door, and so on and so on. Frequent interruptions are barriers to communication. Also, anxiety can be an environmental factor. Anxiety filters into a couple of these, but it's part of the environmental, okay? So, cultural barriers to communication are behaviors and misunderstandings. So that's where we get into perception. Sometimes if I say something to you, there's a miscommunication because my culture is so different from yours, what I said to you did not compute. You know, if I said this guy is as dumb as a box of rocks, would that make any sense to you? No. No. Why? Because what's the analogy between being dumb and a box of rocks? But if I was in the United States, and not even all the United States, if I was in New York and said that to somebody, they would know exactly what I was saying. Okay? Or I think that person is one can short of a six-pack. What does that mean? Okay, it means they've got a mental problem. Okay? So you see, that's a miscommunication because of cultural differences. So when we go into communicating with people and or negotiating with people from different cultures, we have to remember that we don't want to use things like slang, idiomatic phrases, sometimes we call it metaphors, right? Because there's going to be a miscommunication there. You have to speak what we call, sometimes they call it international English. Okay? You have to eliminate all of those idioms and so on that we have a tendency to use. Okay? Language, of course, again ties to cultural variables in word meanings. So, I'll give you, where's my thing? So here they are. Oh, God, it's tight. So, variables in word meaning. If I put 3 words up here, hopefully you can see these. Okay? Variables in word meanings. How are all of these pronounced? The same. Exactly the same. But what do they mean? Yeah. Okay. So, what's pair? P-A-I-R. Yeah, 2. What's pair? P-A-R-E. That's to cut something. You pair it. Okay? And how about P-E-A-R? P-E-A-R.
Fruit.
Fruit. Okay? So, if I'm using one of these words and you don't know exactly the spelling of the word I'm using, because you can't see the spelling when it comes out of my mouth, you know, the assumption is you know what I'm talking about, but you may not. Okay? In fact, that's one of the things that makes the English language very difficult to understand or learn, because there are sometimes we call those homonyms. Okay? Homonyms, words that sound the same but are spelled differently and have totally different meanings. Okay? That's part of language, and we have to be very well aware of that when we're communicating. Okay? Psychological barriers, again, anxiety over work, various forms of fear. You know, if your manager is yelling at you and you're afraid you're going to lose your job, sometimes you have a tendency to tune your manager out because you're so fearful. You hear the volume of his voice or her voice, but you don't hear what's being said. Okay, that's psychological barriers. Okay? And relational, lack of respect or incorrect assumptions. Again, if you have a lack of respect for your supervisor, your manager, you have a tendency to block out what they're saying. Okay? That's actually a barrier to communication, where you have a lack of respect. Okay? You have a tendency to, yeah, sure, yeah, all right. You know, kind of like when you're married, that happens too. You know? In both of my marriages, 2. I was always accused of having selective listening. Okay? Selective listening. Okay? So that can be a relational barrier. Okay? Everybody got that? That one you'll remember now. Some communication methods that we use, particularly at work. Employee handbooks. Is that a communication process? Yeah. It tells us things about the hours of work, the benefits we have, our policies. Everybody get an employee handbook when they start work? No? When you work for a lousy company. You should have an employee handbook at work. Newsletters. Companies have newsletters. Some of them are printed. Some of them are online newsletters. that provides information, it's a communication method. Having organization meetings, obviously the telephone is a communication method. Then there is informal communication and in-person meetings. So, what is a type of informal communication? Anybody want to guess? Yeah, it could be. That's kind of informal.
Chatting, like chat.
Chatting, yeah. What's up? Yeah, could be. Also, another type of informal communication, believe it or not, a legitimate form of communication that's informal, gossip. Is gossip a form of communication? Yeah. It's an informal form of communication. It's legitimate. Okay? And of course, the question always comes up, who gossips more, men or women? Actually, research shows men gossip more than women. So, there you are. I knew you'd say men. They always say men in my class. Oh, it's always the women's gossip. But no, actually, men gossip more. Okay. Also, in-person meetings are a communication method, so kind of one-on-one. Okay, one-on-one, which is probably the most effective form of communication, are face-to-face communications. Okay. The flow, and I told you a lot of communication flows top-down. Information flows from the higher to the lower levels in your organization. In some companies, you may actually have bottom-up. Information flows from lower to higher. Normally, you'll find that in high-tech sector companies where you have what we call high-performance work teams working in the lower levels of the company, and they drive a lot of the process and changes up through the company. So it can go bottom-up as well. Horizontal communication is normally what we refer to as peer communication, where you have peers within a team or group or across functions in an organization. It's called horizontal. Okay? Sharing information across even departments is considered horizontal communication. Network is information flows along a predetermined set of links through an organization, such as email and so on. It's routed on a network. It's just simply called network communication. And informal, as we mentioned, channels provide assorted facts, opinions, suspicions, rumors. So gossip and rumors is a form of communication. It's informal. Anybody ever use rumor? When I was in HR years ago, many years ago, whenever I wanted to, we had a union where I worked, and anytime I wanted to kind of get the union riled up, I used to like playing those games, I would start a rumor, okay, and watch it go through the entire manufacturing plant very quickly, okay. I used to like doing things like that, but I used to like torturing people when I was in HR. So rumors are effective. You start a rumor that there's going to be a big layoff, watch how fast it spreads, okay? Sometimes I like to shake people up a little bit. Yeah, hey, did you hear? I heard that there's going to be a 20% layoff. Okay? It works really good. It's very effective. So that's an informal method of communication. Okay? I used to use that to torture the union people. They have unions here? No, they don't. Oh, Bahrain, they have unions. They don't have a union here?
No, they do. But
They do have a union here.
civic question.
Yeah, it's not a real union, but yeah, they do have it here. Yeah. So, that's the end of chapter 1. See how fast that went? Did you say break?
We said perfect.
Break, huh?
Perfect.
Oh, perfect. So basically in chapter 1, now, obviously I have abridged these slides from the actual presentation, but the good news is what you're getting today, all of it, okay, not all of it, but anything that's on the exam is going to be in these slides today. All right? Obviously, the rest of the slides that you have, that you will get, that you have copies of, that represents a cross-cut of all the material. But anything that is on the exam, I'm making sure we cover here today. Make sense? Okay.
You're not going to torture us?
Huh?
You're not going to torture us with the exam?
Am I going to torture you? Actually, the exam is not that difficult. And by the way, I wrote the exam. They're my questions. So somebody at SBS or somewhere, they did not do them. I did them. So, and and I like that because I know they're fair, okay? And the questions on the exam, and we'll talk about it a little, later today, but just so you know, the questions on the exam are they're not memorization questions, they're conceptual. So if you get the concepts of what we're talking about today, you'll be able to answer the questions, okay? It's not like, oh, I have to memorize. There's not a lot of memorization. There might be some, but I'll point that out, by the end of the day. Okay. So, the next piece of communication. Speaking, listening, and feedback. Okay. Everybody know what feedback is? What is feedback? Somebody tell me. I don't know what it is. What? Yeah, well, as an example, my manager tells me I have to write a report, right? So I sit down and I write the report, I hand it in, and then what happens? I get feedback from my manager. Either it was a very good report or it was really lousy. Okay? Lousy. Okay. Don't be so negative. And that ties in, by the way, that ties into perception. It all depends how it's presented. If you write a lousy report, I'm not going to say to you, that was really lousy. I'm just going to say, I think there might have been some areas you could have done a bit better on. Okay?
My boss likes it. Big marks on the report.
Oh, does he? Okay, so that's feedback.
And lots of sad faces.
Oh, you're right.
Not very good.
Your boss draws sad faces?
And she keeps
We used to do, I remember teachers in grammar school doing that.
She's also a teacher, that's why.
Huh?
She's also a teacher.
See? I was just going to say, and that was my next sentence was going to be, I'll bet you that it sounds like a former teacher.
She keeps calling me to office and asking not to do a sad face with their email.
Wow. How old is this boss?
Late 50s.
Toward grammar school?
She's female.
Well, female. That's pretty scary. Draw sad faces on your report? Wow, that's real professional. I like that. When you hand the report in, you should draw a happy face on it then. Maybe you can influence her. Okay. So, what are we talking about? Speaking, listening, and feedback. So, first of all, we're going to look at know your audience. What does that mean? Know the people you're speaking to. Know the people you're communicating with. So, successful communication occurs when the message sent and the message received are the same. Okay? Understanding the various demographics of the audience are critical to effective communication.